Everyone knows about such torture devices as vice, pliers, and loud repetitive music, but these all seem like toys compared to terrifying torture devices. For example, with a red-hot metal animal, a cramped cabinet with nails and spikes, and a sharp Spanish log. In this video I will show you these and other most terrifying torture devices in the history of mankind, which will surprise you. Brazen Bull. Many experts unanimously agree, it is the Brazen Bull that can rightfully be considered the most terrible torture device in the history. When you learn about the essence of this device, you will understand why this is true. The Brazen Bull has other names, such as Sicilian Bull and Valarid Bull. The device is a life-size Brazen Bull statue itself. On the side of the bull, or on his back, between his shoulder blades, there is a special door, through which the prisoner or the executed was placed inside the bull. The door was closed, and then under the bull's belly there made a fire. The flame gradually heated up the bull and at a certain moment turned him into a hellfire, from which you could not get out by yourself. Some historians say that the bull was perforated in the nostril area. This allowed smoke to escape and cries reminiscent of a bull's roar to be heard. It is difficult to imagine how evil this picture looked. By the way, the first person to test the Brazen Bull was his own creator, Perillus, who was placed there by Phalaris. Phalaris liked the Brazen Bull so much that he started to torture and execute many people in it. In the end, justice prevailed, and the cruel tyrant also ended his life in this terrible device. Torture rack. Torture rack is probably the most famous medieval torture device, as well as one of the most terrible. This torture device came in two varieties, vertical and horizontal. The vertical torture rack usually consisted of two poles buried in the ground and connected by a crossbar. Tortured person's hands were tied behind his back, then lifted by a rope that was tied to his hands. Sometimes extra weight was tied to his feet to speed up the process of suffering. To hang like that, even for a minute, was an incredible challenge for the body, but poor souls could hang like that for hours. After the joints were destroyed, the tortured would confess to anything. There was also more terrible torture rack, horizontal. Tortured persons were placed on the device. His arms were fixed by a special mechanism, which began to twist his limbs in opposite directions. Prisoner had only one option to save himself: confess to everything. Once the torture rack began to work, there was no turning back. Spanish donkey. The Spanish donkey, or Spanish horse, is not a transport, as you figured out. It is another horrible device for torture, which was created by Inquisition. It was mostly used as an instrument of torture for women, who were blamed for heresy or witchcraft. But sometimes, men were also tortured on such a horse. Spanish donkeys had different types, but the general point of the device was the same. It was a wooden log in the form of a sharpened triangle, fastened on the legs. The tortured person was undressed completely, sat on a donkey that his feet would not touch the ground, and they tied his hands behind his back. The person would sit in this position for as long as the executioner wished. To be more effective, the executioners often tied weights to the legs of the victim, which pulled him down. The Spanish donkey is regarded as a terrifying instrument of torture. If we talk about analogues, the only torture device more terrible than donkey was the Judas cradle. But in the Middle Ages there were many other devices that brought even more discomfort to victims and criminals. Keep watching and you will see a torture coffin, a witch's bathing chair, iron cabinet with nails, and other implements of ancient times. I'm sure many of you have heard of the British rock band, Iron Maiden, but did you know that these musicians named their band after the torture instrument of the same name? Iron Maiden is an iron cabinet in the shape of a girl with long sharp nails and spikes inside. The tortured person was placed in this cabinet in a standing position. After that, the door was slightly covered. Already at this stage, the Iron Maiden brought the person a lot of discomfort and someone would give out information immediately. If the person was silent, the door was covered a bit more tightly. If the interrogated again refused to speak, if the executioner realized that the interrogation had failed, he would close the door completely, after which it was impossible to get out from the maiden. By the way, compared to other torture devices, about which I already told and will tell you more, the Iron Maiden is under doubt. Historians still could not find confirmation that the maiden was really used for interrogations. but the sarcophagus was found, so many people believe that in the Middle Ages the Iron Maiden was used as a tool for torture as well. I think you guessed that the Middle Ages was a harsh time, with unsanitary conditions, constant wars with epidemics, and, of course, the witch, or rather, ordinary women, who for various reasons were considered witches. Everyone knows that witches were burned at the stake, but there were other ways to deal with witches in the Middle Ages. One of them was the witch bathing chair. A terrible and cruel device for torture. It was most often used to women who were thought to be witches. It was also used on sinners. The device was a chair tied to a mast. It was placed over a water pond, in which a person was placed. This method of torture was preferred in the cold season to make the victim even more uncomfortable. The accused would be seated on a chair, tied up and immersed for some time in the pond, and then lifted to the surface. This could go on for hours or even days. Torture coffin. A torture coffin was otherwise known as an iron cage, and caged torture was a form of reprisal for people who committed various crimes in the Middle Ages. Depending on the severity of the offense, a term was determined. Therefore, an iron cage was an instrument of torture as well as an instrument of execution. Sometimes a person was placed in such a narrow cage in which it was almost impossible to move. Moreover, the cage was often placed not only in a basement or remote abandoned place, but also in the most public places. In addition to the social stigma, the caged prisoner was subjected to attacks by passers-by. It was forbidden to throw stones at him. Additional discomfort was made by birds and insects. All this together makes the iron cage one of the most horrible devices for torture. Spiked shoes. How long can you stand on your tiptoes? If you don't know the answer to that question, you can pause the video and check it out right now. Some of you may only be able to stand for a few seconds. Maybe some of you may be able to stand for several minutes, but eventually you will still put your heels down. This device was an iron shoe with sharp spikes that were placed under the heels. The spike could be removed with a screw. The tortured person was put into these shoes and his feet were locked in place. There were sharp spikes under the heels, so the victims had to walk on their tiptoes. In the beginning it was acceptable, but soon their strength was over, and their heels would involuntarily fall on the spikes. When their strength was completely gone, they put all their weight on their heels, in which case they had to tell all the information to keep their feet in one piece. Prayer cross. Compared to the other devices of torture in this video, the prayer cross, otherwise known as the STORK, looks quite harmless. There are no sharp nails, no spikes, or joint twisting mechanisms. Nevertheless, the STORK is one of the most horrible devices for torture in history. The STORK was invented in the 16th and 17th centuries in Austria. It was a metal structure with shackles that gripped the hands and neck together. Criminals and apostates were chained in a cross-shaped position or in a posture of prayerful submission. After just a short period of time the limbs started to stiffen, and the abdomen began to cramp. After that, the man was released. In that moment he was already completely subdued by the executioner. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to put a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.